Hey guys, it's Ashley Simone here. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend. I was supposed to record this video last night, but I ended up studying and just getting really tired. It was late, so I'm here to record it this morning and put it up. I'm going to be talking about the book of Ezra and Nehemiah. At first, I wasn't too sure what was the purpose of these two books, but of course all the books have purpose in the Bible, but I wasn't sure if I needed to skip over this book or not. But as I began to do my research, I found that it was very, very important. And Ezra, okay, so these two books are basically talking about the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Um, the Before these books, the Israelites was taken out of their promised land and sent to exile to Babylon because of them being so disobedient and worshiping idols and worshiping everything but God himself, the person who delivered them and set them free. They was doing everything else but not worshiping him. So God was like, he was over that, and he exiled them to Babylon. And Babylon was the king was Nebuchadnezzar, and y'all know about him. He just that place is hard. That place was horrible. It was a horrible place. And Ezra, he's a teacher and a leader. He basically ended up when it was time for the Israelites. So Ezra was someone who wanted to help rebuild Jerusalem, rebuild their people, rebuild the temple, and just build it back up. They just had a passion for that. It was him and Nehemiah had a passion for just wanting these people to live right and live the way God wanted them to live, and they was really trying their best to get the people to do that. And in the beginning of the book, it talks about the Jewish returning to Jerusalem and how they began to work on the temple, but the people in the nearby areas caused a lot of trouble for them, stopping the work for several years. So I think I said this earlier, but the younger generation who didn't exile to Babylon, they were still living in Jerusalem, and they wanted to help build a temple, but Ezra wouldn't allow them to. And it really doesn't make sense because there was scripture, there were prophecies by Jeremiah and Ezekiel. They both said, I don't think it was Ezekiel too, but I know that Jeremiah said that the old and new generation was supposed to build up Jerusalem again, but that's not what Ezra was doing. He told them no, they couldn't help. The younger generation couldn't help, and it kind of started a feud between the younger generation and the older generation. And I think a part of the reason why Ezra didn't want them to help was because when he did arrive to Jerusalem to teach God's laws to the people of Judah, the people were committing the same sins as other nations were committing. So the younger generation was still sinning. And I guess that's why he didn't want them, at least part of the reason why he didn't want them to help build this temple, because they wanted to help, but he was like, no. And the people were in danger of being punished or even destroyed by the Lord. So, I mean, it really can go any way. So Ezra prayed and confessed Israel, and the people agreed and began obeying God's law. So I skipped to the story of Nehemiah. He had a heart to restore the city's wall, but also to restore and reestablish God's people both physically and spiritually. He was the king's cupbearer at the time when he was like, I want to go back home and rebuild these walls. Nehemiah wasn't even born in Jerusalem. He was really born in Babylon in exile, but he was in the king's palace, sipping his wine before he gave the wine to the king, just to make sure that the king didn't get poisoned. So Nehemiah was already a man of putting life on the line for other people to make sure that they lived. So one day, the king that he was working for, he saw that Nehemiah was sad in his face, and he asked Nehemiah what was wrong, and Nehemiah told him he wanted to go home to rebuild the wall. And the king was like, all right, you can go. Like, you can go. I'll give you everything you need to rebuild this wall. I'll send some people to help you. I'll make ways for you to get there without being in trouble. And Nehemiah went. He went to Jerusalem and started to build a wall. And as he started to build a wall too, I believe the younger generation wanted to help, but he wouldn't let them help. He wouldn't let them help. And at the end of the book, Ezra and Nehemiah combined forces to bring about a spiritual renewal among the people. They gathered all the exiles together for a festival and read and taught them the Torah. And the Torah was their Bible back then. And then they celebrated the ancient feast of tabernacles to remind them of God's faithfulness for the wilderness journeys they took before they got to the place that they were now, back in Jerusalem. Then they offered a confession of their sins. They vowed to renew the covenant and to follow all the commandments of the Torah. And they finished with a great celebration over the temple and the walls of Jerusalem being built back up. And they thought that this was going to be the turning point, because they started teaching and they got the wall built and the temple was back up, and they were teaching and getting people to confess their sins and repent and stuff like that. But this story is still really like confusing to me, because like I don't understand why they didn't let the younger generation help them. Like, if anybody can that question for me, please help me understand, because I don't understand. Because even though it says that they taught the exile people the laws of the Torah, but my thing is, why didn't y'all let the younger generation in on the teachings that you were teaching too? Because it's like, okay, the exiles, obviously they still had things they needed to learn too. And while you're teaching, why don't you teach them too? Why don't you bring them in too? And I think that, well, to me, I'm not sure, but how I see it, I think that's why at the end of the story, when Nehemiah tours around the cities, he finds that people have not been fulfilling the covenant vows. people were working on the Sabbath day. They were setting up markets around the walls of Jerusalem and working on the Sabbath day. And Nehemiah basically loses his mind. He went crazy. He started beating people up, pulling their hair out, yelling, telling them to obey the commandments. And the thing is, you can lead a person to the water, but you can't make them drink. And as you're leading, you got to be a good leader too. No sheep shall be left behind. If you got the opportunity to teach somebody, even if they're not living right, even if they ain't living their life how you're living, it's your responsibility to teach them too. How you gonna teach one but don't teach the other? Teach them too. And then Nehemiah goes on to say that he prays to God that God will remember him, that at least he tried, and the book ends. Jeremiah and Ezekiel, both prophets, said that the people's hearts needs to be changed. They need a new heart. But the thing was, what about God's promises he made? How will he fulfill the covenant promises? Because he promised these people something, but how could these people get their promises? How could God deliver his word if these people wasn't living right? But as you read on and as I continue to make these videos and study more, I believe that the Bible will tell us how he fulfilled these covenant promises, because he's not a man that he should lie, and what he says will come to pass. So we shall read on. So you guys, I love you guys, and I'm going to talk about the story of Esther next, so look out for my next video. Love y'all. Bye.